This meeting is being recorded.
Hey, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. So this is Mike Lai, the Editor-in-Chief of the Shipping and Trade Journal. And thank you very much for attending this webinar, which is a part of the Knowledge Transfer Forum organized by the Faculty of Business of PolyU in collaboration with the Shipping Research Center. The topic of today's webinar is climate changes and aviation. In recent years, there are issues of climate changes concerning the aviation sector. For example, what role does the aviation play for achieving the climate changes goals? What role do climate change policy, the greening of the aviation industry, and the use of sustainable aviation fuel play in the Asia-Pacific region? What are the roles of carbon taxes for use of cleaner aviation fuel? In this webinar, we have organized two sections for discussions. The first one involves policy discussion, and the second one concerns discussion on international and Asia development. These discussions will be chaired and moderated by Dr. Ahim Cherney. So may I invite Dr. Cherney to introduce our speaker and also start the panel discussion in two sections. Ahim, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for your kind introduction. So first, let me first encourage the audience to really participate via the chat box during the presentations with their questions, clarifying questions, and to unmute yourself and ask your questions directly during the discussions after the presentations. And we will have two sets of presentations, two presentations in the first part, two presentations in the second part. And the title of this webinar is a little bit mysteriously called like 3 questions, okay? There are the 3 questions mentioned. And on the LinkedIn websites, LinkedIn sites, for instance, GARS, ATRS, and so on, you can, the 3 questions are specified, but let me just clarify what the 3 questions are. So question 1 is about SAF and SAF quota. So what role do they play for the achievement of climate goals in aviation? Second question, what is the role of green aviation policies and SAF in the UK and in China? This is obviously, especially also China is obviously very important because the biggest market in the world in aviation in the near future. Question 3, then we're talking about multilateral policies versus unilateral policies. So the webinar will be split into 2 sessions, each with 2 speakers. And so let me just clarify why the first question. So we will often see diagrams and we see that carbon offsetting and SAF will play a major role for the greening of the aviation policy. But then they are it is a little bit unclear to, what is the share of offsetting versus SAF? And I think that's something that we try to, we try to discuss in the first 2 presentations. So our first speaker is Steph Proust. He's an emeritus full professor at the Department of Economics at the University of Leuven. I hope that I pronounced that correctly. And teaching transport environment courses. And he's currently a research fellow at TOI in Oslo, at the VTI in Stockholm, and he's also CES IFO fellow in Munich. And he's one of the founders of a spin-off Transport Mobility Leuven. He works on public policy questions such as the decarbonization on the transport sector, and not only aviation, but also other modes of transport. Yeah, Steph, please, we're looking forward to your presentation. And what I will do is I will share a screen now, and then you just let me know, help me navigate through your presentation. Let me see, here we go. And now full screen view. Here we go. All right, Steph, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Achim, for this nice introduction. Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, then we're going. Okay, this is thanks for the invitation to share some discussion. At least there will be some discussion on what are appropriate policies. And what I'm going to do is take really what I would say a very global view on how the world can cope with climate and climate and aviation. Okay. Now, first slide, please. Let me start. Some sorts of inspiration for many things is just what is the EU climate policy for aviation. They're actually very ambitious. They have announced a very ambitious policy, and I think most of you know that we have already included carbon emissions from aviation into the emission trading system for industry electricity. We are also trying to encourage travelers to switch to high-speed rail. We are forcing airlines to use an increasing share of sustainable aviation fuels, biofuels, e-fuels, so carbon neutral fuels. It's proposed to European Parliament. I think discussion is still going on. We want them to participate in a worldwide CORSIA agreement. In principle, it's yes, but so the details are still to be discussed. And there are also subsidy programs announced for R&D on sustainable aviation fuels and on new aircraft technologies. Already implemented, more to come. My question is very simple. Is this a cost-effective approach? And next slide, please. I'm also kind of an environmental economist. An environmental economist has a standard methodology to address a problem. First of all, I think it's important to really discuss what are the real issues. And I think I don't have to explain you that the objective is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the world, not greenhouse gas emissions in Europe. That's not the main purpose. It's really to reduce it in the world. And it's also not to reduce flights, many things that is obvious for you. It's not to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to zero in 2050, something I see regularly. It could very well be that there are negative emission technologies that could cope with still limited emissions from aviation. And we should, of course, concentrate the efforts in those sectors where it is cheapest to do so. Now, for that, tradable permits are perfect system because you can distinguish the role of who makes the efforts and who pays for it. Now, one of the main issues is, of course, that we face this economics of international intergenerational cooperation. So climate change is a prisoner's dilemma. All countries will benefit from the efforts of one country, but it is the one country that will pay for it. And some people say, yeah, it does not hold for R&D cooperation. No, it's not true. It does it hold for catastrophic events? Yes, it holds for almost all in all situations. And it's not easy to get out there, but there may be some common ground. There may be some win-win situations for the whole world. A final point that is very important is that it is not, it's really the world emission that counts and not the emission of the EU. It's not so even if the EU can realize zero emissions in 2050, we're only 10%, by then maybe only 5% of the world in terms of emissions. So what's the point of reducing 5 or 10% to zero? No. I think we should really have a global outlook, a global look at this. And please, the next slide. And the next slide gives me kind of way I look at the question. And you see there 3 regions or 3 governments. By far, the most important region in terms of emissions will in the future be what I call the rest of the world. Excuse me for the expression. It's probably it will be the most important part of the world. But Europe and US have a special role to play. Why do they have a special role to play? Because they have the 2 main producers of aircraft. And if you look at the different instruments that are available, you can use a carbon tax, you can use sustainable aviation fuel, and you can use fuel efficiency standard. Now, there are many ways to circumvent carbon taxes, sustainable aviation fuels, but whenever you have an aircraft, the fuel efficiency standard, if you can get the fuel efficiency much better for an aircraft, that can be really be one of the important instruments to certainly for Europe and also for the US to do something about the climate issue. Now, there are different problems coming in. There are R&D spillovers between Airbus and Boeing, so that Boeing doesn't, or Airbus doesn't like to do too much efforts, because some of it may spill over to Boeing and then they lose their competitive advantage, et cetera, et cetera. There are also producers coming up in the rest of the world, which I call competitive fringe. But let me move to my 3 policy ideas in the next slide, please. Okay, I just go next slide. I just want to concentrate. Next slide, yeah. Okay, the first policy idea is that actually the EU and also the US, because they have the main producer, they're responsible for production of something like 90% of the emissions. If you look at who produced the aircrafts, has been a lot of progress in the CO2 emissions over the last 20 years. And if we can stimulate innovation efforts, of course, Airbus and Boeing have, as such, already an incentive to make an effort, because with this incentive, the users of aircraft look at the overall user cost. And if you can propose an aircraft that is cheaper to fly without too many extra costs, this is will give you extra market share. But the limit will be the user cost. So the limit there, the carbon tax comes in, or the permit price for emissions comes in. It will be the kerosene plus carbon tax in the whole world. The average in the whole world will dictate more or less what will be the efforts by Airbus and Boeing. Their extra regulation can come in, and extra regulation, if you want to protect a little bit their market share, they will also need some extra subsidies. And of course, if Airbus, not Airbus, but if the EU and the US can sit together and come up with a more ambitious standard for aircraft, you can do even much more. So this kind of first policy idea. Now, next slide, please. Thank you, Hakim. And so that's a small, so you can have a look, but let's move on. Next slide, please. I'll try to stick to my 10 minutes and still next slide. Okay, this is an important slide because it deals with sustainable aviation fuel. Why was I interested in this fuel efficiency for aircraft? Because I made a study together with my consulting company 2 years ago, and we came out that the SAF blending standards were actually extremely costly as a policy. And let me try to quickly illustrate this. So this is a very small example where we try to reduce emissions by 25% with 2 policies, a carbon tax of 50%, and a blending carbon neutral, so blending by carbon neutral fuels of up to 18%. You will see that the fuel cost will go up by, given that I assumed that the cost of carbon neutral fuels cost 100% more. Now it's more like 300, 400, 500% more, but let's assume that we have some technological progress. Fuel cost will only go up by 18% for airlines, while it will go up by 50% if you use a carbon tax. And of course, the airlines will prefer very much a policy where in the end, it costs only 18%, the fuel cost is only 80% more than 50% more. But if you look at the relative cost to society, it will cost you 5 times more to use the blending mandate than to use the carbon tax. And it's very easy to understand, because if you use a fuel that is twice as expensive, while actually the effort to do is only 50% more compared to kerosene, it's a very costly policy. You impose very costly fuels. Another way to put it is you subsidize these carbon neutral fuels at a very large extent, 500, 600, 1,000%, in order to add them to the fuel you use in the airplanes, in the aircraft. And this is as such a very costly policy. Why is it not conceived as a very costly policy? Because the consumers forget that the tax revenue is not a real cost. Okay, let me move to the last idea. Thank you. Next slide. Okay. Of course, carbon taxes are important. Carbon taxes are not easy. I say carbon taxes are permit prices. They can do, if they're sufficiently high and they're announced for the future, and that's important because whenever you want to have innovation in the future, it will depend on what carbon taxes you expect in the future. If you expect no serious carbon taxes in the future, yeah, you can't expect a lot of innovation efforts. So high carbon taxes will be good for aircraft efficiency innovation. They're also the right incentives for sustainable aviation fuel. Whenever these sustainable aviation fuel become cheaper than, let's say, twice the price of kerosene, then they become really interesting. And they are the right signal to give to the development of sustainable aviation fuels and not the blending mandate. And of course, it will also restrict demand for aviation in an efficient way. High carbon taxes are necessary, but if they're only there in part of the world, they're not very efficient. What will happen is that you will have fuel tankering. Fuel tankering will not only be a problem for high carbon taxes, it will also be a problem for blending mandates, because whenever you have to make a flight overseas, you will stop somewhere in between and take some other fuel. It will be a much more incentive for aircraft innovation. And finally, they will restrict demand, but mainly demand for local flights. Thank you for your attention and your help, Achim. I use my time.
My pleasure. So, okay. So what I can hear is that you're doing two things. First of all, you highlight the global view, which is also a motivation of the structure of today's webinar. And second, what you do is coming to the answer for the first question is, when you think about the relative importance of carbon offsetting in aviation and SAF, then it seems to me that what you're saying is that you think, based on your analysis and research, that maybe the SAF part wouldn't be necessarily so high. And all right, so I think this is an excellent time to sort of switch over to our second speaker, because I think this is, a very good combination actually of speakers, and it's very obvious from reading the bio why I think that is the case. So Siegfried is the VP Director of R&T Affairs in the Airbus Public Affairs Germany department. R&T standing for what? What is it? I wasn't exactly sure. Siegfried, R&T?
That's research and technology.
Research and technology. All right. So research and technology affairs in the Airbus Public Affairs Germany department, has over 15 years of experience in the aerospace industry, over 20 years of political lobbying expertise. And in June 2011, Siegfried accepted the honorary appointment as chairman of the board of AREC, which is the Aviation Initiative for Renewable Energy in Germany. And this is actually how we got to know each other, because our Department of Logistics and Maritime Studies is also a member of the organization. And I have participated in many of the discussions. And I encourage everyone to sort of also become a member, because as I feel it, the discussions are really good and very insightful. So Siegfried, we are very much looking forward to your presentation. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Achim, and thanks for the kind introduction. So, hello everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Hong Kong Polytechnic University for inviting me to participate in today's webinar. And special thanks, of course, goes to Achim. And yeah, as Achim already mentioned, we are happy he joined Eric on behalf of Hong Kong Polytechnic. Achim, I guess it was about a year ago. At least it was during COVID, the
Right.
COVID crisis.
Yes.
So yeah, as Achim already mentioned, I am the CEO of ERIC, and you know, to say this up front, I will not speak much on behalf of the company which is employing me, so I will not comment in detail on Airbus activities, but just 2 short sentences, if I may. So my company is already providing the most energy efficient aircraft for today's airline fleets. And the second comment I'd like to make is, so, and if I would refer, you know, to Steph's presentation, I don't see that we need regulation in this respect, because it is it was and it will be our aim, you know, to come up with the most energy efficient aircraft to the market, because otherwise we would never be successful. And so, you know, we are driving Boeing and Boeing is driving us. And in the end, we are providing high energy efficient aircraft for civil aviation. And the second comment, I guess in one of Steph's slides there was mentioned, Airbus and Boeing are responsible for the emissions. Of course, we're not responsible for the emissions. I agree, it is our products, but if somebody is responsible, well, then I would rather say it's the airlines, and it's the airlines' duties, you know, to come up with something which is providing less emissions. But yeah, that's the topic I'm going to speak about now. And as Achim already mentioned, ERIC was founded 11 years ago. Even though we are an association under German legislation, we of course have links to the USA, to Australia, to Africa, and since a couple of months also to Asia, thanks to Achim's initiative. Today we have 37 members, and we are, you know, going with big steps towards 40 and even more, but in the end it doesn't matter how many members we do have. What's important is that we, with our members, we are able to cover the entire value chain. So from research and technology, or let's say feedstocks, up to the tank of an aircraft. And our aim was always, you know, to do R&D or R&T, to set up production in Germany, and of course we are engaging in regulatory matters. So as of today, we don't have any production site, any SAF production site in Germany. Things are moving, well, from our perspective, rather slowly, but things are moving. And so we hope that we are able to reach these goals, which you can see on the screen now. So we are aiming together with the German government to set up and operate what we call a PTL, so a power to liquid research technology and demonstration platform in Germany. Of course, we are keen to set up large-scale industrial plants in Germany, and most probably this will also be plants using renewable energy and green hydrogen, you know, to come to SAF via, as of today, with the Fischer-Tropsch technology. In contrast to what, let's say, the EU Commission is proposing, we would rather go for something which is much more well, we would like to go to a higher level as far as quota regulations are concerned. So we are aiming at 10% in 2030, and in absolute terms, this would be roughly 5 to 6 million tons of SAF. So I guess I don't need to go into detail why SAF. You know, it's a drop-in solution. We don't have to change infrastructure. We don't have to change aircraft, because as of today, blends up to 50% can be used. And besides being able to reduce CO2 emissions, SAF are also able to significantly reduce non-CO2 effects, be it sulfur, you know, soot, NOx's, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of advantages why air transport or why civil aviation should engage in using SAF on a much larger scale than it is being done today. I assume you all know the different SAF options which are being qualified and certified. So as of today, we do have 7, and the last 2 allow, you know, a co-processing with conventional or with crude oil. Yeah, quite a substantial amount of technologies, and I guess in the pipeline there are, I don't know, 15 to 20 more. So we will see some of them popping up very soon, or most probably being qualified by ASTM, and this will hopefully give another move to what is the situation today. You know, today there is only little SAF available, referred to the 300 million tons of kerosene, which is being used yearly on a global scale. At least in my country, you know, much ambition is going towards this power to liquid SAF or eSAF or e-fuel, but from not only my personal perspective, but from our perspective, significant levels will only be reached beyond 2030. So what are we going to do in the meantime? Just wait until, you know, PTL SAF is becoming available? No, we should use all sustainable feedstocks and technologies to go towards the 2050 goal, which I assume you're all aware. So reducing CO2 emissions by 50% or even more. I believe, well, actually, I would rather prefer, you know, having incentives for civil aviation, but as of today, and well, maybe I'll be retired at that time, when either the European Commission or governments in the EU would allow incentives. If you compare this to what is available in the USA, their tax credits are being provided, and in contrast to this, the European Commission is proposing SAF mandates, and I can only hope that this is going to become a European regulation, hopefully this summer, and if not this summer, then by the end of 2022. Why I'm saying this? Well, I'm saying this because already today there is enough feedstock available, you know, to replace all the fossil kerosene which is being used today. So we do have the feedstock, but what is missing is the production capacity. But that's going to prove also soon. Of course, the main hurdle, the main obstacle is pricing. So SAF is much more costly than fossil kerosene, and you can see here, the different technology pathways and, let's say, the range of the SAF costs and prices, and the hope is that, with higher production capacities, prices will go down. But from my perspective, SAF will always be more costly than crude oil fuel, crude oil kerosene. Maybe in a couple of years, we might be able to reach a factor of 2, but it will cost more than fossil kerosene. So as I was speaking about production capacity, this is just a snapshot, so it's not complete, but it shows that there are a couple of companies, Neste, World Energy, Philips, Shell, Repsol, LanzaJet, who are going to increase the global SAF production capacity within the next couple of years. And I assume you're aware of what the Biden administration recently introduced, the so-called SAF Grant Challenge, which should reach by 2030 a production capacity of close to 10 million tons for the USA only. And I would guess that also in Europe, we will be able, to get close to this figure, maybe not 10 million tons, but at least above 5 to 6. So I was already talking about, well, what is called here incentives, of course, for the producers. That's an incentive. If mandates, blending mandates or quota regimes are being introduced, and for the airlines, of course, it's well, it's rather a burden. But if we're all serious about what the final goal is, to reduce the climate impact of aviation and to preserve our blue planet, it's a must. Besides technological improvements of Airbus, of Boeing, of other aircraft manufacturers, and even a bit of, let's say, the famous single European sky measure, SAF, the use of SAF is a must. Otherwise, we will never get to the global excuse me, to the global aviation goal. So I'm not going into detail, and in this slide, it's just a snapshot. What's already introduced in the different countries in the EU. Well, take out the UK now, but yeah, I would assume there is more to come. And with the renewal, with the Refuel EU Aviation legislation, which is currently being discussed in the European Parliament, well, there might be a quota regime introduced for the EU of 5% by 2030. So that's more or less my last slide. That's a snapshot from 2020 from my friends at CAFI, at the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative in the US. And it just shows, let's say, the different commitments of airlines and the mission they are supposed, to reach. And the one at the bottom of the slide is the most recent one. You may be aware that Deutsche Post DHL Group announced to use roughly 650,000 tons of SAF until 2026, produced by Neste and supplied FIPP. So in a nutshell, SAF is a must. Otherwise, as I already mentioned, we will never reach the global goal of, or the goal of global aviation. And therefore, ERIC with other partners, other organizations across the globe are working to, or are trying, to contribute to reaching this goal. Thank you very much. And a bit of advertising. If you're interested in our work, you can go to our homepage. You'll find there an ERIC roadmap, which is describing what should be done in Germany, but also on a European scale. And yeah, thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to any upcoming question. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Siegfried. So what I learned from your presentation is, first of all, that Airbus and Boeing have strong incentives to improve their efficiency all on their own, no regulation required. On the other hand, when it comes to the use of the greening of the aviation industry in terms of fuel and greenhouse gas emissions, then what I understand is you say that the aviation industry have to have their part in the reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions, and SAF quota would be an important part of that, of achieving sort of that goal. In that sense, coming back to the previous question, what this sort of indicates to me, then we are talking about the relative importance of SAF to the greening of the aviation industry relative to carbon offsetting, that, the kind of, I think there is some sort of like the relative importance of SAF quota considered by you is sort of a little bit higher than what staff would be thinking. So if I summarize that accurately, so to say.
If I may, Achim, just a brief comment.
Sure.
Of course, I truly believe in SAF, and to be very honest with all of you, I don't believe in taxes. I would only trust taxes if those taxes could be used to reduce, let's say, the production costs of SAF, or would directly go into aircraft R&T or aircraft R&D, but I'll probably be dead, when my government or governments in Europe will go that way. So therefore, I don't, and taxes, at least in Germany, cannot be used for other purposes. It's a tax, which goes to the Ministry of Finance, and that's the way it is. The German government would be keen to introduce an aviation tax on a European scale, but I don't think this is ever going to happen. So sorry for
no, I definitely appreciate. I think the idea of earmarking of tax revenues is something that we understand is very difficult to sort of implement. But I'm quite sure that staff, for the discussion going, I would have sort of some hierarchy here. I would first give the word to staff, then to other panel members, because I saw that Chunan was also having a long question in the chat box. I would ask him to just share with us your thoughts online here via the video function, and then we have some others, also other questions. So Steph, how about you want to respond something? Oh, you have to unmute yourself, Steph. You're still muted.
Okay. First, I have to apologize to Siegfried in the sense that, of course, it's not Airbus that is responsible, it are the airlines. But what I wanted to say is that you deliver more or less 90% of the aircraft for passenger transportation in the world. And as such, this can be a very important lever. You are really needed to make things happen. It's, let's say, let's compare it with electricity. You can say electricity consumers are responsible for the CO2 emissions, but there are the electricity companies that has to come up with more renewables, etc., etc. So that's the comparison I wanted to make, and nothing more than that. Now, of course, the point you make, on, and I think we understand each other, that SAF are expensive. SAFs are expensive. Now, I still believe that the primary incentive should be the permit price, and the permit price, let's say, in terms of CORSIA or the European system, the permit price really makes sure that you divide the efforts in a cost-efficient way in an economy. And there's no reason to make an exception for aviation. That's what I try to defend the same policy when I discuss with the trucking industry, when I discuss with the automobile industry. Everybody wants to say, yes, it's fine, but give us all the tax revenue. No, 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 this is not the way to do. The way to do is to make sure that you use the tax revenue properly, and the tax revenue can be used properly, a part of it for R&D, subsidies, etc. That's a very valid point, but we do not need to use all the permit revenues for R&D, and as such, I think I even do not agree with the European Commission that wants to say, okay, all the sales of auctions of permits have to go to climate. No, it's not correct policy. And okay, if we want to be serious about pollution, we have to do it in an efficient way. Otherwise, we will have to limit very much our ambitions, because let's say if we are just using a very inefficient policy, and the policy of SAF costs us 5 times more than a carbon tax, then I say, what are we doing for society? For society, we are just setting up the wrong policy. And it's not against Airbus, it's against the European Commission that I try to make a point. And it's a point I made already 3 years ago or 2 years ago, with a detailed study in which we had all the cost data on provided by the European Commission, and we came out at the same conclusion. Now, I know there is enormous pressure from airlines, from industry, but sometimes we have to make sure, okay, for society, some things are better than other things. And if these some things cost you 5 times less, then I think it's my responsibility to stand up and say, okay, look, let's be serious, let's make the computation, and let's try to find out how best to do that. And SAF can have a role, but the role should be primarily dictated by the long-term permit price. If the long-term permit price is 100 euro per ton of CO2 or 200 euro per ton, this should be the right incentive for the SAF developers. That's the point I wanted to make. And now I'm going to leave the floor to you.
I think one issue that Siegfried mentioned at the very end, which hasn't been touched here, and I think when you're talking, my feeling is when you're talking about the tax policies, the sort of implicit assumption is that the taxes will be sufficiently high. But I think that's something that Siegfried is kind of questioning. According to my understanding, of course, please correct me, Siegfried, if I'm wrong. So that, and that's certainly something that there's a lot of resistance against increasing the carbon taxes to an appropriate level. And then perhaps really, in order to make sure that anything happens, because simply relying on a carbon tax is way too low, would perhaps then risk achieving the goal of the climate goals that we want to achieve. And then it's better to have an expensive SAF policy rather than nothing. Is that, is this sort of, am I?
Okay, I understand. But then again, you could also bring in the policy of more aircraft efficiency and extra subsidies, and if necessary, regulations. Look what we have done for the car industry, what we are doing for the trucking industry. And of course, I know that with a duopoly for aircraft manufacturers, there's a much stronger incentive for aircraft to develop emission efficient aircrafts than when you have a lot of competitors, because they can gain extra market share by offering a better aircraft. But I think there is still a role for fuel efficiency standards for aircrafts, helped with subsidies. And I think that is a much less costly policy than enforcing SAF for the moment. There may be a breakthrough in SAF, but okay, if the SAF costs only 50% more than the current kerosene, okay, then I'm very much in favor. But we are not there yet. They cost 2, 3, 4, 10 times more. And then I think I say, okay, look, this is not an efficient policy. I'm sorry, I've got.
Yeah,
no, I of course I agree with Steph, and yeah, as Steph said, that's the aim we need to achieve to get down with the production costs, and well, of course, as we all know, the idea is, you know, with the ramp up, costs will go down, at least when you take into account, you know, waste residues, let's say oil and those kinds of feedstock. When we are talking about renewable energy and green hydrogen, we need to go to regions, you know, where these energy costs are very much lower than.
Yeah, I think we lost Siegfried right now. Yeah, I can't hear him as well. I can see that others like Steph also can't hear Siegfried.
No.
Okay.
No.
No.
Already, because Siegfried is on vacation, maybe he just sneaked away now back to his family.
Achim, I have.
Yeah, Chunan, please.
Yeah,
Chunan. We have, by the way, we have a very active chat box, and I try to integrate this, but I also see that the speakers respond. So there is something going on there, some discussion going on there. But Chunan, please go ahead with your.
Yeah, I have some comments for Steph's insights. Very, from my perspective, very insightful policies. But there is a practical question for the implementation of carbon tax. For example, in China, promoting a new tax is very, very difficult. The government should let the public to receive. Okay, it's okay. So maybe the process will be 15 years, 20 years. So it's kind of hard to be for the carbon tax to be a really useful instrument in the near future. So it is good, but maybe it may be difficult for some countries, I have to say. So this is what I thought. Okay.
All right. Steph, do you want to?
Let me very, very quick reply. Of course, now it's every tax system is different, and I still think that the permit price. Some people say the permit price is a very different system from taxes. I agree, but in the end, what really counts is what is the price aviation will pay for fuel. And if you complement, so if you just add a permit price, and the permit price is close to 100 euro per ton of CO2, then for me, this is fine too. It's 100 euro per ton of CO2. Well, if you compare it with kerosene price of 2019, will more or less add 50% to the fuel cost. And that as such, it's possible. Some people say, yeah, it's unbearable. But say we pay now kerosene prices that are much higher than than just 150% of the 2019 prices. So for me, what is important is the signal, how much you pay, and secondly, to use the proceeds of your permits prices or permits revenues correctly. Those are the two important issues. And of course, yeah, I know it's maybe, of course, a little bit theoretical, but I'm doing the same thing for road pricing. And road pricing, we see exactly the same type of story. I think for CO2 is so much easier. What you could do in China is also implement a tax on imported petroleum products. I think that would be beneficial for China on many accounts. would also help to curb, let's say, congestion, would help to do many things that you want to achieve in China. So I think there is some hope for going for either high petroleum tax, it's the same thing, or a high permit price. So, and of course, I'm not an expert at all on taxes in China.
Thanks, Steph.
So
You
have returned now. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was my system shut down. I don't know the reason why, so I had to.
Yeah, that just happens. No problem. No problem.
Yeah.
Have we been interrupting you? Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
That's all fine for me. And again, I would agree with Steph going for carbon taxes and of course a carbon price would be a proper mean, to, or maybe a better mean, to get things done. And as we know, the ETS price today is already at roughly 90 euros per ton. But that's my personal opinion, and please don't tell this to our customers, to the airlines. They have, I don't know how many millions of free allowances, so they are not, squeezed to go for SAF usage or maybe other means, because the Commission is still providing free allowances to the airlines, which again, that's my personal opinion, which is not contributing to achieving the civil aviation's goals.
But as was also highlighted, the issue really is not to getting the tax just right in sort of one small place in the world, but it's a global issue. So then the question is how to manage the tax system, like globally, or the taxing emissions on a global level at the sufficient level. I think this is one.
If you take out at least the USA, then things could be, I don't know which is the proper organization to get this initiated, but you need to take out the USA, maybe even China and others, because with them, at least that's the experience we do have with the ICAO. Things will not move on. So anyway, that's again my opinion.
Changmin, I also remember in the very beginning you had a relatively long question posted in the chat box. Maybe you want to say something.
Oh yeah.
Thanks. Maybe you can just briefly introduce yourself.
Oh yeah, sure. Hello everyone. This is Changmin Jiang from the University of International Business and Economics, located in Beijing. So it's thank you for him for inviting me to join this very interesting workshop. I actually have a question for staff. Yeah, I actually agree with you that the cost for SAF is way more like too expensive for it to be like an efficient way to reduce the GHG from aviation. But you mentioned that it will become a good method if the price goes down, right? But we all know that the price for something would not go down, miraculously. Miraculous. Sorry. I think a major justification for SAF quota or other related policies are hopefully we can increase the production so that we can achieve economies of scale one day, so that the price will go down, right? So if you take that into account, I mean, if that actually happens, I'm not sure whether that would actually happen, but if you look at like solar panel production in China, that was the path, right? So if you take that dynamic into account, would you kind of like revise your conclusion a little bit? Or yeah, that's my question. Thanks Ahim for letting me to ask the question.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Yeah, thank you. Steph? You are still muted.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm fine. Thank you. Good question. Now, a lot of people make this comparison with solar panels. Now, I think we have to do with a very different technology. So I think the miracles are a little bit more difficult for this technology. By the way, we are trying already since years to implement blending mandates for biofuels for cars, for trucks, 5%, 10%, and we didn't see the miracles coming. So the miracles may still be around because technology can come with great inventions, but I still believe that it's important to give the right incentive in the long term. And the right incentive in the long term, actually, if you use a carbon tax or a carbon, let's say, permit price of 100 or 200 euro per ton, then this gives you the correct idea for the SAF developments. What should we aim for? If we can reach something and deliver something that is under 2 times, let's say, the price of kerosene, the present price of kerosene, okay, we have a good product. But we should not keep going for products that cost us maybe 3, 4, 5 times, because then there may be much better emission reduction technologies around in the economy. And then we should bluntly leave our aviation keeping, say, just emitting like it is now, or a little bit less, put it this way, but count on the other technologies in the economy. And the other technology in the economy, everybody is developing new technologies, including carbon capture, including all kind of stuff. And we should take a really global view and not concentrate on one sector, aviation. And I know you are all aviation experts. I'm not. So I try to keep a very global view, because what matters is cost efficiency for the economy. Sorry, it's no.
Okay, yeah, good. Hans Martin, you have, I think we take like 2 more minutes before we move to the second part. Hans Martin, you had one question. How about you just unmute yourself and are you there? Are you there? Yeah, it looks like. Yeah.
Yes, I'm there. Yeah, question. So the problem is that all countries do carbon pricing, and you need the carbon pricing to get new technology, innovation, including SAF. So the question, how can we do that? One idea is these carbon border taxes. Steph, is that a good idea? Has that the potential to create, to set incentives that others also adopt carbon pricing? That's my question.
It's again a very difficult and global question. Thank you. I think it will be coming, because if there is no let's say correction of border prices, if we cannot rely, if Europe, and I'm talking as European, if we cannot rely on more global permit prices that are a little bit in line, I think what will happen is that some isolated regions will make some efforts, can be China, can be Europe, but that will as such be insufficient. And we will have to start adapting for much more climate damage than we wanted to. There is, I think, yeah, so we will need these policies. But again, it's not easy. We have the World Trade Organization. There are many, many obstacles to get this going. So I still believe that fuel efficiency standards can be an important instrument in addition to carbon permits, in addition to maybe SAFs, but for SAFs I remain very reluctant. No, it's very, very short answer to a difficult question. Thank you.
Right. So there, let me see whether there is someone I missed. So if one other participant in the audience has a short question, now is the time, because otherwise we move on with the second part. And I wanted to say thank you definitely to Siegfried, who I know has to leave a little bit early, and even perhaps staff has to leave a little bit early. So this is why I also extended the discussion for after the first part a little bit longer, because I knew that maybe they would have to leave a little bit earlier. So thank you very much for joining. And of course, we would be happy for you to have you longer here, but I know that, that you are extremely busy. So if you have to leave, then of course, thanks again and for your presentations. And it was really great to have you here and also in the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Siegfried. And let's move on with the second part. We have again 2 speakers. Well, I mean, we already highlighted the importance of the global view, and that's sort of obvious. But when it comes to policies, then also kind of, we're having like the European view, we're talking about the US, Europe, but the real important part, especially when it comes to aviation, is Asia, right? So it is, I think, so important to really have an integrative discussion and really always keep also integrate the view of Asia into the discussion of global policies such as climate policies. All right, so let's move on with the second part. Let me introduce the speakers to you. Our first speaker is Chikara Miyoshi, and she's a reader of environmental systems for aerospace in the School of Water, Energy and the Environment at Cranfield University. She has a long history of working in the airline industry, such as All Nippon Airways, Lufthansa, and startup member of Skymark Airlines in Japan. She has a strong record of consulting and research projects, and very important, she's a member of the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Mandate and Commercialization Group of Jet Zero Council UK. So thank you very much, Chika, for joining this discussion, and we are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, him and everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this interesting seminar. So
and I think you also had a question before. So anyway, so maybe you just go ahead and then we can hopefully address that question also in the discussion later on.
Sure. So thank you very much again. Today I'd like to mainly talk about the sustainable aviation fuel, how we need to develop using the case of the UK. And then some of the audience don't know so much about what is a carbon permit or tax, and what is a policy regulation drivers. And firstly, I'd like to briefly explain about that. So this is a famous net zero roadmap IATA produced. This is its target. So our dream that we want to do go this way. So when aviation and all airline put the set net to zero in 2050, to be honest, it's going to be very hard and difficult. However, we need a target. So we expect several, fuel efficiency improvement the next 5 years thanks to the new type of aircraft. However, reality is we are going to have some drop by 2025. And then in order to have real net zero, we really need electrified or hydrogen-powered airplane. That's the reality. And before having that, we need to have kind of a lower carbon fuel, we call it, and SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel. And then of course, economic measures factors, it's the instrument. We really need to make it clear. Tax and then tradable permit are totally different. We often confuse. Tax, government can set the price for that, and we don't know where this revenue going to be used. So permit and tax are very different. So for policy driver, it's starting from Rio de Janeiro in Earth Summit. And then they set UNFCCC. So Kyoto Protocol also set a kind of a scheme for that, in the set the carbon credit on that time. So all of those carbon credit and also emission trading scheme, they belong to this establishment of the UNFCCC. And then Croatia also belong to this. And then having that, aviation become a part of the EU ETS from 2013. However, would you remember we had a lot of discussion from China, Japan, and a non-EU country complain, including the US, and this going to be against the Chicago Convention to fly to freedom. And then EC took the stop the clock action in 2012 by complaining to ICAO, you guys needed to establish international market-based mechanism while we are stopping the clock. And then ICAO set up the CORSIA carbon offsetting reduction scheme for international aviation. And it's going to be implemented already for voluntary phases. And then sustainable aviation fuel, we call it, it's the only for those fuel have a CORSIA eligible fuels. It's under the regulation set by ICAO. They say CORSIA fuel is 20 or 80% lower than the conventional jet fuel in terms of life cycle assessment. That's another trick, and to be honest, because those operation phase is not included. In the end, biofuel, we have a summer emission. And then many organizations and set their own net zero roadmap. Left-hand side is about UK one. So interestingly, 200 million CO2 in the worldwide, and then the UK are aiming less than 20 million tons. In the end, we cannot stop people flying, and then we need aviation. So we need to consider how we can make real net zero. So for doing that, we really need electrified airplane or hydrogen powered aircraft. But all technologies really low TRL, the technology readiness level. So, and Airbus and Boeing are aiming to get those hydrogen airplane 2035 in commercial. And in order to that, we really need a big R&D for that. In other words, sustainable aviation fuel, and those, we call it revolutionary technology, electrified hydrogen aircraft, it's going to be the new big business for big countries like the EU and US. And the UK are chasing, because we're going to have a new just industry, the business, and in the coming 30 years. So to be honest, it's the kind of competition among US and UK and in Europe. So right-hand side, recently, ATI, UK's Air Transport Technology Institution put it. So in the beginning, they are talking, we're gonna have smaller airplane first for hydrogen, but now they change mind, particularly by Airbus. They want to have the middle-sized narrow body or wide body hydrogen first. But you can see still 2050, we don't have a net zero yet. So how we finance this new technology and R&D to get. And also we need to change all the infrastructure. So pipeline or tanker link to carry hydrogen, and then everything is cost a lot, including airport infrastructure. So that is fine. So meantime, we need a SAF. And then sustainable aviation and criteria, ICAO set it not only for greenhouse gas, also water, soil, air, and also human rights and labor rights. And then importantly, land use right and also land use change. So also food security, many things we need to consider. And the most largest problem is everybody talk about feedstock. Yes, so let's say in Malaysia and already Neste and then Total, those European biofuel companies established the big factory, and then China now invests a lot, and then China always very fast in a large scale. So we are going to have large competition to get the feedstock. And the cost, we are talking that the price is high because simply we don't have any supply yet. 2 years ago, only 0.05% of flight flew by SAF. So every country set a target and mandate 10%. So how we can get this feedstock? But meanwhile, we need to set a target. So it's a kind of a pressure from industry to the government. So that's why everybody set the 10% mandate. And then life cycle value is not net zero. And then there are still a lot of uncertainties about non-CO2, particularly NOx. Actually, NOx has more impact on the climate change rather than CO2. So in the UK case, so industry are pushing a lot to the government. And then based on, they set up renewable transport fuel obligation. This is kind of legislative. However, mainly this is set for car or other industry. SAF is more recently included in 2018. And in the end, for the UK and other country too, they want to have all electrified car by 2030. And then probably those heavy vehicle and aviation going to be fueled by SAF. And then in order to increase the supply as early as they can, and then UK government and then put the money to establish this factory in 11 factory in the UK. But problem is government set 10% mandate. However, they haven't have any financial incentive yet. For example, US, particularly West Coast, they already have an incentive for airline, like $2 US per gallon. So kind of incentive is required to promote SAF, and in order to have that, we need to have a larger supply with lower cost, but it's going to be very challenging. In the end, we need to think about how to power aircraft rather than using jet kerosene. So, and this figure shows UK energy supply by source. So, and this navy color is by oil. So aviation is part of this, and then also maybe other transportation. And then biofuel is green part, it's still a small share. So how we can increase this share in a limited time? And then to provide the stuff is cheaper to the airline operator. And also SAF pathway, we need to expand more. Currently only relative in the cheaper, still expensive. And then we need to expand the feedstock for SAF. Maybe probably we want to have a power to liquid, hydrogen to SAF, or but it takes really time, same as the hydrogen aircraft, could be the later than 2030. And also low carbon intensity grid with lower cost imperative. In the end, we are going to have a world to power aircraft by electricity. And then how to generate electricity. So these are the key energy policy should be set by the government. And then also we need to consider carbon capture, CCUS for the air transport in not only for and to making the lower fuel, but also we need to consider CCUS too. So for today's takeaway, self-development is imperative for achieving the net zero target before having revolutionary technology. Still, we have a lot of issue and constraints for worldwide. We don't have enough feedstock. And then financial incentive is a key to, but another things, equity issues. When we think about environmental policy, we need to consider rich or poor, larger or smaller. It's not only for airline, country, region, also airport, and then only large airport can afford SAF. And if we put only incentive to those airport, how about the smaller airport? And then largely, we need to consider this agenda as entire air transport system, including other mode, globally, regionally, and nationally. So that's my message today. I hope I keep it time.
Thank you, Chika. All right, so let's move to we directly move to the next speaker. Before then, we continue with the discussion. Our next speaker is Chunan, and let me introduce him to you. So he's an associate professor at the School of Economics and Management in Beihang University, Beijing, China. So he received his PhD in economics from the Toulouse School of Economics, and his research fields, big surprise, includes a carbon reduction in transportation sector. And I should say that the China university system is a little bit special in the sense that the universities do have some specific areas they concentrate on. And as far as I understand, the Beihang University is really concentrating on aviation. So, and is a leading institution, Chinese institution in aviation research. So we are grateful for having you, Chunan, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Achim. Thank you for your invitation and nice introduction. So today I will share my view on China's action on carbon emission reduction in aviation. First, let me introduce China's attitude towards climate change from the perspective of aviation. According to my opinion, China is determined to achieve green development of aviation. In 2020, President Xi Jinping has pledged that China aims to have CO2 emission peak before 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. The Civil Aviation Administration of China, that is the CAAC, issued the 14th five-year special plan for green development of civil aviation on December 27th last year. This is the first planning named after green development in the history of China's civil aviation. Soon after, only 10 days later, on January 6th this year, CAAC issued a roadmap for building of intelligent civil aviation, which specifies the roadmap of green development of aviation until 2035. In last month, the central government of China also issued a plan on hydrogen energy development, which clearly supports the application of hydrogen fuel cells in aircraft. In the special plan for green development, the China's government aims to achieve carbon neutral growth by 2035, and at that time, airport CO2 emissions will gradually enter a peak plateau period. So this this table shows some main indicators of green development. For example, including fuel consumption per RTK of aviation fleet, CO2 emission per RTK of transport aviation, and sustainable aviation fuel consumption. In addition, in this plan, China aims to constructively participate in the negotiations on climate change at the 41st and 42nd IQ assemblies, carrying out pilot application for self-blending and supply models in regions with annual passenger throughput of more than 5 million, construction of photovoltaic coverage and supporting energy storage facilities on the roof of terminal building, and accelerating the increasing consumption of green electricity in airports. So in the roadmap for building of intelligent civil aviation, China aims to create a civil aviation plus green and low carbon ecosystem. In this roadmap, there is detailed plans for production and application of SAF, and the innovation of new energy aircraft, as well as the construction of civil aviation carbon trading markets. So currently, in the last year, the national carbon trading market in China is in work, but the aviation is not in it right now. But in the next 5 or 10 years, China has a detailed plan to include civil aviation into this national market. There are some other measures to promote green development, such as building a hydrogen energy industry system, and greatly increasing the wind and solar capacity to a large extent, where the renewable energy power can not only provide a source of green electricity for aviation, but it is also an important input for of power to liquid PTL cell. There are also many practices in China. Here in this table, we can see there are some flight tests operated using SAF in China since 2011 by Air China, China Eastern, Hainan Airlines, as well as Cathay Pacific. And here in this figure, we can see a biofuel jointly produced by PetroChina and Honeywell. Some other Chinese airlines also operate full life cycle carbon neutral flights, and passengers can use WeChat to obtain electronic boarding passes, which can save a lot of paper every year. Just two months ago, Oriental Energy, a company, and Honeywell launched China's first sustainable aviation fuel industry base in Guangdong province, and this is a big event in China. Next, I will introduce China's view on climate policy, international aviation from my perspective. China identifies several challenges. According to the national planning, China identifies several challenges in reducing emissions in international aviation in the short term. The energy structure of civil aviation dominated by fossil-based aviation kerosene cannot be fundamentally changed. The advanced and applicable decarbonization technologies for civil aviation cannot be applied on a large scale. In the long term, as a developing country with the largest population, China has a huge market demand for civil aviation, and energy consumption and emissions will increase rigidly. China also realized that its capability in producing SAF and new energy aircraft are still relatively weak compared to developed countries. So in this figure, I show the GDP and emissions per capita among the top 20 countries with the highest RTKs in 2019. Here, this gray circle represents China. Here we can see that both the GDP and emission per capita of China are very low compared to other major aviation markets. In this figure, according to our calculation, we simulate the offsetting responsibility of the top 20 countries under COSIA. So we can see here for China, especially after 2030, its offsetting responsibility will be the highest among in the world, among all countries in the world. Facing these challenges and difficulties, China, by the beginning of this year, China, as well as 4 other emerging countries, Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa, have not participated in the pilot phase of COSIA. So according to the national planning issued by the central government, I summarize the China's position on global aviation environmental governance, including first taking responsibility for emission reduction in line with China's national conditions, development stage, and capability, following principles of fairness, common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, strengthening the application of international law, and promoting the balance of obligations and rights. To conclude, from my understanding, China has realized the urgency and key challenges in reducing carbon emissions in aviation. Reducing aviation emissions substantially in the short term may be unrealistic for China, considering the cost and the potential of industry development. So China decides to, according to my understanding, China decides to choose a long-term pathway. In the following 15 years, comprehensively, China aims to comprehensively implement various instruments such as SAF, new energy aircraft, market-based measures, and move forward step by step. Okay, so we have China's position, we have China's effort, but there always exists an open question: how will China act in the future? This question does not matter a lot to China, but also to the world. So it's interesting, but very hard. So thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chunan. I mean, I really like there are a couple of things that I think are very interesting. The first is that there's so much going on right now, especially also in China. I think that is really exciting. And you also see, I think, if you read your figure with the increase, the liabilities with respect to the carbon CORSIA, and how large it is and how strongly it is increasing. This, of course, has to do with the projected growth of the industry, right? It kind of illustrates how important the Chinese aviation market will be globally. So definitely, I think having all this kind of the views of, thinking about climate change and aviation policies without properly accounting for the Chinese and aviation markets is actually quite, it is something that is not very effective, I would say. We really need to take this into account. And I think, Chika, you also mentioned the kind of the net zero in the UK. One of the issues, of course, always that comes to my mind is achieving net zero locally is one issue, but what is the effect globally? That's also something that I thought was quite important, quite well highlighted by staff. So what we have reached now, it's half past. And of course, when I'm the timekeeper, this is always bad news because I'm very bad at it. And I know that I think, Chunan, you're still having a little bit of time. But yeah. Chika, do you have a little bit more time to a few minutes?
I can stay, yes, 10 minutes. Yes.
So Chika, maybe you could also say, because I know you also know a little bit about Japan. So would you mind just saying a few words also on the developments in Japan from what you know?
Yes, Japan has been focused on investing a lot for hydrogen. So, for example, like a Toyota, they're already selling hydrogen car. And recently I learned it, they have the most IP, intellectual property related to hydrogen production. And then, so they have been focusing on, and as long as I know, and maybe more than 30 years. So regarding SAF, they are quite far behind. However, they set the mandate, same as UK and another country, 10%. So, but reality is they are importing SAF from Singapore and to Japan. And interestingly, from Malaysia and those European countries also importing feedstock from there. So currently, ICAO's calculation method still, and those SAF life cycle CO2 is lower than jet fuel. So to be honest, we need to those SAF production domestically. Otherwise, we will increase those transportation in CO2 and others. So that's the current situation in Japan.
I think there is something, there are some important discussions here when it comes to the transportation costs. And that's something that I learned via my attendance in their meetings of AREC. And those are the book and claim policies, you know, where an airline can sort of book the use of SAF for itself, although it doesn't use SAF for itself, but rather make sure that other airlines somewhere else use it on top of this. And then they can sort of claim that use for themselves. So they pay it, and this way you can save the transportation cost. Is this, I think, do you think this would be a solution?
European case, they need to fuel SAF within Europe, so to promote those domestic power. And then that's why, like after Brexit, in the UK case, they need to have the SAF within the UK. But problem is they don't have enough supply yet. So that is why, but still it's really early stage, and every country put those aggressive mandate. So in other words, again, it's kind of industry pushing the government for that, because 3 years ago, nobody talked about SAF. Now, everybody talking about SAF.
Right.
Yes, it's always like that. When I started the aviation environment study around 2006, and we have a kind of, in terms of research, you had a boom. And then after that, we also have a little bit down, and then nobody talk about it. And then again, we have a big attention in this area. So it's interesting to see.
So I think I remember correctly, if I remember correctly, our discussion at Chunan, you were also saying, yes, there is this, there are these efforts about increasing the use of SAF in China, but and a lot of I try to read between the lines, and I feel, including also what I'm thinking, that people have some hopes that China, who is, you know, it's a country that is so good in scaling up production. And doing things at massive scales, that China would be, you know, able to kind of produce stuff at a level which helps bringing down the cost of stuff. And I think you, or who was it, mentioned the solar industry as an example. So what do you think about this?
Yes, China is used to make some national planning and invest a lot and achieving the economic scale. So it is possible for SAF, according to my understanding. But for China, there are a realistic difficulty, maybe the feedstock. China has a large population, and the feedstock may compete with food production. So just as Chika's comments, there may be a very intense international competition for feedstock with EU, with the US, with the UK. So it may be a problem. But I believe China is very dedicated to developing SAF. So it's but we will see. So it's it depends on the China's the actions followed by China's the Chinese governments. So yeah.
Right. And also, I think Chika, she mentioned, you have to go now, Chika?
No.
Oh, I want to. Chika, you mentioned the patents, right? The intellectual property of Japanese companies when it comes to hydrogen. And so this sort of indicates also, how you can use you need know-how in order to do all these, to produce all these to make use of these green technologies. And I think this is also where like the collaboration kind of really is important, like global collaboration, and especially sort of making also China and Asia like an integrative kind of part of in the whole process, and in order to make this kind of successful, because without Asia, without China, we're not gonna succeed with reaching the climate goals. There is one question by Dennis. Dennis, do you wanna, Dennis McCall Jr., you wanna perhaps just unmute yourself and ask your question?
All right, that's no problem. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever everybody is. So my question was more towards the impact that SAF would have on small island developing states, because a lot of these airlines, they're traveling from these developed worlds, from let's use the UK for example. You have Manchester, where you have Virgin Atlantic going down to Barbados, British Airways going on to St. Kitts and Nevis. Now, if these airlines are interested in using SAF, what impact would it have on these small island developing states in terms of like resources? Because you have to refuel in order to get back to your destination. But with these small islands, they're not able to produce SAF. So what impact would that really have on the airline industry? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. That I mentioned, and then not all airline cannot afford SAF. So could be those routes are restricted or limited, and then maybe it's related. Now we have COSIA and EU ETS, UK ETS, and then APD. It's another tax. So many instruments. It's going to be our next, our research question. We need to consider mutual, impact of these. What is the most effective instrument? That I have been thinking, because we might have a traffic leakage, carbon leakage, in another one, SAF leakage, because not all airline cannot afford it from the beginning. So that's we call it equity issue, poor and rich. So like China, rich big country can invest those R&D, but how about other non-annexed country? It's like a developing country, how they can afford this stuff. And then these are things we need to consider when we talk about. So that's why we need to consider as entire system about this topic.
I mean, as long as you have the carbon offsetting alternative, then you don't necessarily need to use this stuff, right? If you don't have access to this stuff, you can still fly, but basically you have to buy carbon emission permits in order to, offset the emissions.
Particularly COSIA, simply they want to promote biofuel. And then in the end, this project might help developing country to produce those stuff, or to make from home waste to our garbage into SAF.
Right.
And then, yes, so many aspects, but always we have equity issue. Even EU ETS and others, even flight from, let's say, London to Johannesburg, Johannesburg to London, impact of those things are different.
All right. So are there any, I think we are already 10 minutes over time. I regret, but I feel that we have to stop the session now. And so just the last word, I think what we need to do is invest a lot of efforts in the future of aviation green technologies. We need, I think we need higher carbon taxes. And it's very obvious that China and Asia will play a crucial role, and they have to be an integrated part in the development of the climate change policies. So thank you very much to all the participants. I hand over to Mike for the final words.
Okay, thanks Ahim for chairing these sections. The time is short, and now we come to the end of the webinar. I would like to thank the speaker for sharing their views and research on climate changes and aviation. And we will organize another webinar in July on the topic of port and shipping management issues in China. I will send you the webinar information around the time. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. Thank you very much.
And of course, also thanks to Lilian. She has made all the organizational and administrative work so well. Thank you very much. And again, also thanks to all the participants and the audience for their questions. I really, I'm grateful for your participation. Thank you, and we are grateful for your participation. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.